Many of you will no doubt know about the popular X being the name of a player. X was the problem, and then it doesn't say it in there, but obviously the square brackets would be in Team Y. And X is always a player who was kicked from the team in question, and the implication always is that it was the wrong move and he should have stayed, and that the team would be better or the same without him, and that if any issues they had afterwards show that he wasn't the problem. That's always the very simplistic explanation of why this exists. Now, sure, sometimes now it's become a meme and people say it as a joke, etc. But quite a lot of the time early on when it was said, it was meant. And I actually think in a lot of instances, people do think this way, and specifically about some of the famous examples. So it started earlier this year with Kioshima when he was kicked from Envious and they brought in Devils. That was after IEM Katowice. Then we had the situation where Astralis kicked Kjaerbye, who now, especially now that he's doing really well in Dignitas, people say Kjaerbye was the problem in Astralis, because obviously Dignitas has done a lot better than Astralis recently. And then we even saw a little bit of it, admittedly, from the utter cretins who count up this guy's fan base, sadly, with Fox being removed from FaZe initially. And then I've also seen similar logic used, but in the other direction, when a player leaves a team and he was one of the better players in that team, and he thinks he's going to a better team, but his original team does better than his new team does. So an obvious example of this, by the way, would be Kjaerbye leaving Dignitas, Dignitas actually getting better a few months later, and now obviously winning a big tournament, something that Astralis has never done on this sort of scale, and actually Dignitas didn't do when he was there. So then the implication on that is it's a different type of logic. The logic there is more like, oh, well, if you'd have stayed in that team, then you could have done that as well. You could have had that accomplishment. So, it's your mistake for leaving. So I want to address both these types of logic because they essentially all come down to the same thing, which is this very simplistic way of looking at teams and how roster moves affect results and what would happen as if same results were possible to achieve with a different player there, even though even one player difference is 20% of the total players different and can be more depending on the role that you play within the team. So the big problem with this is the logic that you start out with is the player that left the team, if they was kicked rather, if the team then places as bad as they did with him or worse, then he wasn't the problem. That's the joke of he was the problem. And since he wasn't the problem, he should have stayed in the team. All of that is bundled up with the concept of this. Whether people have changed it since is different. But that is the genuine statement. That is the concept that we're talking about here. Which doesn't even follow, actually. Like, that player most certainly could still have been a problem within the team that need to be fixed. Maybe not the biggest problem. And the fact that the results are the same without him does not infer that he was not a problem. In fact, if anything, what's funny is sometimes when the results are the same, people say it, which I've never understood, because it's like, well, if removing that guy means you have exactly the same results with a guy that you all agree is worse, that's why you're saying they shouldn't have kicked him, then how are they getting the same results? That part never made sense to me, but people still go with it. Now, the secondary type, the Kjaerbye type, is where, again, they go a different way on this one. Now they imply that if that player had stayed with the team, it's usually when a player's left the team for greener pastures, if he'd stayed with the team, they would have achieved the same results. Again, also doesn't make sense because changing a player, even one player, drastically changes what happens within a team, and in many of these instances, changes the roles within a team, and therefore success is not even just a case of having that player, but his replacement probably had some key role in success. And shifting the roles could mean the entire team is different, as it did in the Dignitas case, which we'll get into. So they couldn't have had those same results if that guy had stayed. That's why that whole thing only makes sense when you ask the player himself, like, is it a bit bittersweet to see your team go and have success without you? Doesn't make sense to be like, you do know if you'd have been in that team, you'd have had that same success. No, even the player would understand that doesn't make a lot of sense. And certainly that argument doesn't work out. It's not like it was just luck that he was or wasn't there that had the success. Integral to who the players are, especially when we're talking about star players, which rather Kjaerbye ones absolutely ridiculous. So now let's talk about these specific examples to show why this is a ridiculous notion the way it was originally presented and generally understood, even as a joke. So in the first case, the whole Kyo was the problem type situation. Let's start with Kioshima, the first example, shall we? So Kioshima should have been kicked. Absolutely justified kick. You look at all the other members in that team. He was the one performing the worst. He was the least valuable in his role. Not only that, but he'd also been fairly crap, even when they'd had the Kenny S Apex injection in the latter part well, it was like late summer of 2015 and had that run and won the major and a bunch of top fours and a bunch of tournaments. He wasn't even particularly a good player at that point in time. It's hard to even say he was like doing his job. He was just okay, and the rest of the team functioned well enough that they were a pretty good team, and they were at one point in time the best team in the world. So when they then fell off, he was the obvious person to remove. He's the person where no one even could figure out what is he doing. He's not even serving his role necessarily that well. Also, once you've got past the fact that he should have been kicked, now who you recruit is totally different. You can say that recruiting Devil was the wrong move. I would agree with that. I don't think that was a good decision. I think they're fucked up on that. But removing Kioshima, absolutely the right decision. Even in light of what they know about Devil since. I think some of the results they've had recently, they wouldn't necessarily have had with Kioshima. We don't know. Partly because Kiyoshima's mild revival, and notice I say mild, he hasn't even become super sick in FaZe, but his mild revival as a player to be not as bad seems to be directly tied to being kicked from Envious. Being kicked seems to have had the classic effect that I call the revenge effect, where you kick a player because he is choking or he's underperforming or he's not doing his role. He goes to another team and either gets motivated again to play because he's pissed off at you and wants revenge, or gets an easier role on another team that's a worse team, therefore he looks better. Or he's in a situation where he's not choking because he's not even playing at that level, and so he looks good, and now everyone's like, oh yeah, he's got your revenge on you, wasn't he? Oh, he's really showed you guys up. Yeah, you thought he was the problem. He's showing you that you guys were the problem, or some idiotic logic like that. This doesn't work in the Kioshima case at all. He hasn't even shown us anything in FaZe to suggest that he should be in Envious again, playing any of the roles that he would get if he was in Envious. So I actually think that doesn't work at all, looking at his FaZe career. So then we go to another example. Kjaerbye. So Kjaerbye should have been kicked from Astralis. There's an absolutely legitimate move again. Now, in this case, you can't even say they shouldn't have recruited Kjaerbye, because regardless of the results they've had now, Kjaerbye coming wasn't the issue in Astralis. The overall composition wasn't necessarily the issue. They had very good players still, and Kjaerbye arguably has played as well as Kjaerbye did in Dignitas. For most of the time, both players were in the opposite teams that they switched over. So you can't really say that it's like Kjaerbye went elsewhere and was super good and then Kjaerbye was total shit. No, not really. Actually, Kjaerbye was pretty good coming in, whereas actually Kjaerbye was kind of off in Dignitas, and then they kind of crossed paths eventually now towards the end when they had a bunch of times in the teams. And also, Kjaerbye on paper was a much better pickup than Kjaerbye. So Kjaerbye certainly should have been kicked. He was another player where his performance had notably dropped off, especially for his role. Like, he's one of the reasons they couldn't play Dust 2 anymore. His CT AWPing was just non-existent. It didn't do anything anymore. It didn't have any effect. So he dropped off in terms of one of his core strengths in the team. A map dropped off for them, and he's one of those guys that didn't like to play Train and wanted to play Cobblestone when they weren't so good in it. So his own effect on the team was having a negative impact. No, he's still a good player, certainly, but he didn't fit that team at that point in time. And I can't go into this, but there was personal issues, like problems that he had as a person and within his context in the team that were making the environment not so great within that team. Nothing world-ending, but add it into the performance, and I think it was reasonable of all the players they could pick from to kick him at that point in time, especially because the other obvious name to me was dupreeh, and at the time, dupreeh still had enough quality, enough cachet, and was riding that Fnatic performance where we went fucking ham, dropped like 50 kills on Fnatic in 2 maps at MLG Columbus, that justified him sticking around. Then you've got to look at this. When I've spoken to Kjaerbye when he was in Astralis in those last few months and the team was doing badly, he even knew someone had to get kicked. He was even talking with me about, like, maybe one day we'll have this guy in Astralis, or I think this other guy has got to be someone we've got to consider picking up. And he didn't necessarily know if it would be him who would get kicked. I mean, we knew it was like a 2 or 3 people who could be removed, but he knew it had to happen for the team at some point in time, and he knew that there's something systemically wrong with Astralis, and to benefit the team, it would have to go ahead and happen. Then we've got the fact that it's not like he went to Dignitas and just tore it up. I mean, he went to Dignitas and he was quite average, actually. Level didn't really go up much. It was a worse team playing worse opponents, and he was quite average. This is a guy where he was fairly underwhelming. It took him, like, we're talking 3 or 4 months to really get to the form where now he's good in Dignitas. And funnily enough, he's good in Dignitas now in a way that reminds us when he was good in Astralis, but he wasn't like that at the end of Astralis. That's the key point to make. And it's also key to note, Kjaerbye did not become like legit good in Dignitas until Magisk Boy joined the team. That's when he really kicked into gear, and if you look at it, it makes sense, because then you had a similar composition to when he was at his best in TSM. When Device and dupreeh were both playing really well in 2015, that's when Kjaerbye was a super sick third star who could be a hybrid, sometimes carry the game, especially on Dust 2 CT sides. Well, guess what? when Magic's boy becomes a beast, and then Config's having super impact, so there's your device to pre-combo. Now he kicks in again, he's having a really good position because he's back in his normal role. He's got the space created that he's supposed to have in a team, and he fills that hole very, very well. He's a really great hybrid star, and now we can see he's having an impact. So that wouldn't have happened even in Dig until Magic's boy joined. So what the fuck's that got to do with Astralis and them kicking him out their team? Then you got to look at the fact, probably the funniest one, because there was no basis to this one, was Fox fans who, cause FaZe continued to go out in group stages when they kicked Fox. They were like, actually, you said Fox was the problem. Fox was a terrible player in FaZe. During the time they were FaZe, he wasn't a good player. Kicking him was the right move, and kicking him got them on the path to where they've now got Karrigan, and now they're a much better team. And now they've got Karrigan, now they're Orpa, who's a supportive Orpa. Alu, much better than Fox was, way bigger impact. So yeah, it was absolutely the right move to kick Fox. And by the way, where's Fox now? Where's this amazing Fox? What team's he on? Is he having 6 success on some of the... Oh, he's not. He's doing nothing, right? Exactly. How could you even say he was a problem on that one? He wasn't, rather. I think it was the joke that he was a problem. Then you've got to add in, not only did the team not do worse when Fox was kicked, they actually improved online and as a result qualified for EPL. And now, obviously, they're way better with Karrigan. Now we'll go to the second type, which isn't really so-and-so was the problem. It's more the idea that like they shouldn't have left their team because their team had more success. So the Kjaerbye one's a great one. Because in Dignitas, Kjaerbye was the best player. He was one of the best players in the world. He then went over to Astralis and he had okay early results, some pretty good performances, but the team wasn't good. He hasn't had any good placings, and Dignitas has gotten better and better and become one of the best teams in the world now. Here's the problem with that. Dignitas wasn't structured the same way when he was in the team. It's not like they just swapped out like Magic's boy for Kjaerbye. That's not the order of the moves. They had Tensky in the team when Kjaerbye was in the team, so he was hard carrying. Config was choking half the time. Rubinho was okay, but he's just a strong, stable player. And Tensky was bad, and then MSL was having his own issues. And so they had some good tactics. They had one map, Cobblestone, and then they had Inferno, and that got fucking removed from the map pool. And then that's it. They had Kjaerbye going ham. So Kjaerbye, unsurprisingly, took the right move for his career and went over to Astralis. Then you've got to add in that the players in his team not only didn't perform the same way, they weren't activated the same way. Like Config with Kjaerbye in the lineup was so different from Config with Magic's boy in the lineup, not just because of Magic's boy in Config, but because Tensky's gone. And so now they've got a lot more skill in Dignitas, and Magic's boy has unlocked Config, and MSL, you probably have to give him credit with the way he's setting the team up. They've unlocked Config in a way that he hadn't been before, and he's probably unlocked himself. Remember, he hadn't been around that long at like the top level as a pro. I mean, remember, it was only an SK start to even get like matches at top lands. So it's taken him time to get over some of his own choking issues, underperformance issues, find the role. MSL's had to learn what the role is with him when the Kjaerbye went. And then, yeah, when they finally, months later, got Magic's boy in, now they're in a position where they're a better team. And now they're a better team than Kjaerbye's Astralis. But really, has fuck all to do with Kjaerbye or Astralis, if you think about it. Then you've got to add in that it's funny people do that to Kjaerbye, but they don't do the same thing to Magic's boy at any point in history. So now, in the last month or so, Magic's boy's Dignitas is better than Heroic. But Heroic had this little run where they were looking like the number one Danish team. They were looking better than Dignitas even. I mean, they beat Dignitas at Powerland. Admittedly, Dignitas had AZ standing in instead of Rubino. And they had some pretty solid placings, right? They were doing well. They were in my top 10. So at this point in time, did anyone say, idiot Magic's boy, why have you left Heroic? They are better without you. No, we didn't. We understood it was a better move for Magic's boy. And what's funny is, given enough time, it has proven to be a better move in every respect. I mean, it was a better move on paper at the time anyway, but it's now, even in results, worked out better for Magic's boy. But remember, Heroic actually got better, despite the fact that they were in a situation where Magic's boy leaves, their best player, by the way, and then they're in a scenario where, I mean, they were SK and Team X back then, but it's the same core, and they got in Glaive, and I think was it Glaive and Snappy? Were those the players they got? Was that the order, actually? Let me think. Glaive and Snappy, because obviously there was Valde to join. I know maybe Glaive had already joined, technically, and then they got Valde and Snappy. That might be it. Because the problem with that is, they would have never got Valde if Magic's boy stuck around. No one would have been there to vouch for him. They wouldn't have needed him, and they'd have had their 5 players. So he would have just been stuck on the outside. And obviously Valde isn't as good as Magic's boy, but in terms of for that team, he might even fit it better. He actually looks like he fits it better because Magic's boy as a player has developed also more by leaving Team X and SK. He's got a better role for him, surrounded by better players who activate him. So another example of a move which doesn't make sense. And what's funny is people didn't do it in that sense, but if they were consistent with their logic on the whole Kjaerbye one, they should have done that. That's what they should have done, but they didn't in this particular scenario. So the problem with these types of logic is that they are too simplistic and reductionary. What they do is they take all these factors, like 2 or 3 big factors, a lot of small factors, a lot of connected factors, and they say, remove them all and just look at one thing. Who left the team? Did they have better results? Right, he was the problem. Or look at who was kicked from the team. Did they have worse or same results? Then he must not have been the problem. That's way too simplistic, and really it's not analysis on any level. It's just total crap. I mean, you'd be better off just saying, with no implication, Envious hasn't looked that much better since Kio's left. That's fine. That's a perfectly fine statement. Because it doesn't say, and Kjaerbye and Kioshima should have stayed in the team, and their bigger problem was elsewhere, and they're idiots. It doesn't have all that nonsense garbage analysis in the mix as well. It's also ridiculous because it ignores the concept of big problems that are team-wide and style-wide and strategy-wide, and small problems that are player-related, because both usually exist when a team's doing badly. Usually it takes more than one fix, more than one player, more than one aspect of the style. That's why sometimes the perfect one looks like it's one player who fixed the team, but he didn't. One player came in and played better than the player who placed, but then he also shifted the roles of all the rest of the team around so that the team as a whole became better, and it wasn't just because of how he plays now. One player can usually change a lot, but often it's the team factor that ruins a big team. I mean, in Envious, it was obvious because their star players didn't play like star players anymore, forgetting just Kioshima. Now, that's an issue that you need to fix anyway, but keeping Kioshima, who's playing badly, doesn't fix that issue, by the way. That doesn't solve that whatsoever. That's 2 things they need to solve. Kioshima problem and the star player issue, which they're gradually starting to fix now. KNS and Apex had much better performances recently. Happy's starting to become a contributor again. You look at Astralis, another great example. Astralis have all the pieces, always have had. They've got a team-wide issue. Doesn't mean that keeping Kjaerbye in lackluster form and with other problems in the team was the answer. It certainly doesn't seem like it was. In their case, choking obviously is a massive issue, right? They could always get to the 3rd map against an NIP or deep in tournaments, still manage to lose to these really good teams though. And not make use of amazing device performances. Now, you'll notice part of how I've broken this down is my system that I am started to employ last year. Which is when I talk about roster move, I never talk about it in these terms. I break it down. Should this player have been removed? Yes, no. What reasons why? Should they have added this replacement player? Yes, no. Reasons why. What are the implications for what will happen to the team? What should happen to this player when he leaves? Overall summation of how the move went and why I think of it. This is a better way to analyze. This will come to reasonable... It will allow you to model a game in a reasonable manner, and it will stop this simplistic blame game of who the problem is. Because in none of the cases I've seen so far has anyone actually been on point about who the problem was, and beyond a joke, if he actually was a problem or not. Everyone's just way off, and in certain cases, they're 180 off.